Good morning and a very warm DSW welcome to all our attendees this morning. Thank you for attending today's webinar, where we will talk about creating your own journey to conscious inclusion, which seems to be a very popular topic amongst our clients. So this webinar will be facilitated by DSW Associate and HR consultant Claire Palethorpe. We are also kindly joined by special guest and valued DSW client Sam Hine, Social Value and Inclusion Manager of Wrekin Housing Group. So whilst the webinar was aimed at employees within the housing and property sector, we've had a lot of interest from colleagues from training providers, therefore are joined by a mix today. So we'll move on to some introductions. So just to introduce myself, I'm Indy Casby, a resourcing manager at DSW. So I provide support to a diverse range of clients to deliver their learning and development goals. This is via two service lines. So one being the resourcing service line, which is through the deployment of flexible and freelance talent and expertise as and when you require it. And two being through our consultancy service line by providing a bespoke project managed end-to-end solution. So it's a pleasure to be joined by Claire today. And without further ado, I'll pass over to Claire.
Okay, thanks, Indy. Hi, welcome everybody. So my name's Claire Palethorpe. Here as sort of HR consultant, I guess I go under a number of different job titles, range of different things that I do. So my background's in HR. I started out in retail, and then sort of having been sort of freelance and working with organisations, in particular sort of DSW over the last few years, I kind of cross over between HR, sort of L&D, training, consultancy, and kind of everything in between, really. Topic today is a big favourite of mine, and hence we're sort of going to be talking in a bit more depth about that with you all today.
Thanks, Claire. So before we start, at any time, if you have any questions, please post your comments in the chat box. I'll be monitoring the chat box, so if there are any questions, please feel free to pop them through there. And we will be sending a recording of the slides by the end of the week. And there'll also be any sort of opportunities to ask any questions as well. So yeah, we'll kick straight into it. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We will indeed. Yeah, and please do. Yeah, if anyone's got any kind of questions, shares, comments as we go through, Indy will be keeping an eye on the chat box, and I'm sure he'll fill us in on anything that comes up along the way, really. Right, so here we go, everybody. Where do we start this journey? So kind of this is my standard opening, I guess, because I just think it's really important when we come to a topic like this. This is not about kind of getting into your head and reprogramming you. It's about asking you to keep an open mind. It's about asking you to think, well, actually, it's a topic that's forever changing. There's always things happening around it. And it's just being prepared, as it says there, that your perceptions might be challenged. They could be changed. It's about discussion. It's about communication. It's about sharing. So a really important aspect around this whole topic, really. Why? Because we're all different. We're all genuinely unique. We're all diverse. We all bring different things to the work we do, to the life we have, and so on. So all of those past experiences, good, bad, and everything in between, all come with us in our day-to-day lives. And my big message is always that third point there. This should be the environment where we feel safe, maybe to not quite express ourselves in the way we might hope sometimes. It's a tricky topic. Sometimes I think we don't talk enough about sort of equality and diversity and inclusion and this whole journey towards conscious inclusion that we'll discuss today, because we're worried we might say the wrong thing or use the wrong word. And for me, it's just really important we find our best way through it, and we have those conversations. So today those conversations are going to be mainly via chat, whereas if we were sort of had the sort of privilege of being able to sit in a room together, we could have those discussions sort of face to face, but it's definitely what this is all about. So very much my encouragement to you all is to kind of put yourself into that mindset and see where it takes us today. So what are we going to be doing? So these are our aims and objectives for the next, at most, an hour up to that sort of point, and we'll give you the chance to kind of ask questions when we come to the end of the session as well. So what are we really going to do? So we really want to get you thinking about that first bullet point there. How do you lead your teams? How do you lead those individuals? Having equality and diversity and inclusion also in mind. So having that kind of at the forefront of everything that you do. Thinking about the challenges along the way, so what are those potential challenges, and proactively thinking through, okay, how do we develop approaches and our policies, our procedures, our culture that we build to overcome these, which is where we're going to take you to that kind of topic for today, really around conscious inclusion. Very much the sort of the theory, the writing, the thought processes kind of in the whole of this area at the moment is around this journey that we as sort of forward-thinking organisations should be taking ourselves along if we're not already, and developing that understanding and awareness of what conscious inclusion is and what we need it to be for our organisations and our people. To help you understand that better and where that starting point is and where it might take you, Sam, who I've been working with myself and the organisation now for, gosh, a year, Wrekin is going to sort of come on in about sort of 20-25 minutes, that sort of time, and talk to us a bit more about their approach and where it's taken them. So hopefully give you sort of a practical insight around all of that. And we will do some other practical stuff in the session today as well. So I'm very much a fan of theory is great, practice is also really important. So I'll talk you through some practical steps that hopefully you can take away from today's session and really start to think about where you might go next, what you might do, and what improvements you might be able to make. So really encourage you to sit and reflect in the background today. Please do share any thoughts, but really do sit and reflect as we work our way through the session this morning. Right, so let's get moving a little bit further. So some of you might be sat there thinking, okay, what is conscious inclusion? I've heard about unconscious bias, or I've heard about some sort of the different sort of language around this topic of equality and diversity and inclusion. And I guess it's just really kind of using the language to reflect our way forward with the whole of this sort of this topic, this way of thinking, this way of being. It kind of seems a little bit, I suppose, complicated, but actually I think it's quite simple in kind of really what it does in the essence of it. So it's really around thinking, well, actually, consciously, proactively, I should be thinking about my organisation, the way we work, the way we structure things, so that we're sort of consciously moving in ways to actually create diversity and make people feel included. So it's that mindfulness, as suggested on the slide there. It's about how we move forward, doing more than just unconscious bias, so actually consciously moving forward in the things we do. Bias is a big part of it, and we'll touch upon some aspects around bias and how that kind of, if we're not aware of it, can take us through to prejudice and discrimination. And I'll share what I think is a very simple and yet very effective model that we use sort of as one of the mainstays when we're sort of doing the training with Wrekin, a really kind of useful model, a practical model. And really then it's how we take that forward into that sort of journey towards conscious inclusion. And very much a journey, always sounds a bit cheesy, but it's a continuous thing. It's not something we suddenly get right and we stop. It should be a continuous journey that we're sort of moving towards. So I hope that makes sense. And as I say, any questions, pop them in, and I'm sure Indy will jump in if anything needs to be added as we go. So I really like to start and just make sure, I guess, that, you know, although we're moving forward and we're perhaps using different language around this, the underpinnings stay the same. Really important that we're aware that actually the essence of all of this is equality and diversity and inclusion. Always our starting point. Equality, I guess, is kind of an equal opportunity as a concept has been around with us for a long time. When I started out doing this kind of training 20 odd years ago, we talked a lot about equal opportunity training. Now we're more aware that actually to really get equal opportunities right, we tend to sort of use the language around perhaps equity as well as equality. And I'll talk more about what equity is in a moment. But it's about making sure, as it says there, that whatever we do, whatever we have to put in place for people, it's ensuring that everybody is at that level playing field. Everybody has an equal opportunity to access the services we offer, or the different things that they need to enable them to do their work. Alongside that, it's about sort of diversity. So diversity, as we're aware, is, as it says there, recognising, understanding and valuing difference. And for me, it should be so much more than just a tick box exercise. So do we really value the difference that every single one of us brings to our workplace environment? Does every one of us feel fully included when we come to inclusion? So actually, are we getting that balance right? Are we kind of encouraging and building a diverse workplace where everybody feels valued and included? And if people don't feel included, how do they, I guess, raise their hand and say that actually I feel excluded maybe? And kind of how are we sort of recognising and dealing with that? So for me, this is really the underpinning of any journey that we go on sort of towards conscious inclusion. So as I mentioned earlier, equity is the word that's starting to be used, I guess, more often than perhaps equality. And I guess part of that sort of showing the difference, showing the journey that we've come along over the years. And I love this illustration. It just kind of really works for me, so I share it a lot because I just think it really shows so visually and so graphically kind of, what the difference is, and it's so simple. So you can see there on the left hand side we've got the 3 boys of differing heights, and old school equality would say everybody gets treated the same, so regardless of their differences every boy gets the same box. However, really obvious, isn't it? The smallest boy still can't see over the fence. Yeah, so how do we get that level playing field? How do we ensure everybody has equal access? Simple. We use those 3 boxes slightly differently to enable the smaller boy to quite literally level up, come to the same height as the other 2, and now everybody can see over the fence and watch the ball game. It's as simple as that. We can then also take it a step further. So you can see in the box 3 there, we've got justice. So really kind of that journey moves forward and we're thinking, well, actually, why have we even got a fence in place? Is the fence there to stop people accessing something? Is it a barrier in some way? Can we remove that barrier? Are we making people jump through hoops, have to kind of climb over barriers and so on when it's not necessary? So part of this journey is really just questioning kind of why you have some of these barriers in place, and actually, are they helping or are they hindering? So just kind of pause and think about kind of how we might remove some of those barriers along the way, really. So there we are, equality, equity and justice, just to give you that kind of insight into kind of where we're moving forward with all of these. Okay, so moving on. So here in the UK, we have our sort of legislation that sort of underpins everything around equality, diversity and inclusion. So the Equality Act, as I'm sure you're all very aware, came in 2010, replaced all of our previous legislation. So the previous 40 years, 50 years or so before that, we'd had lots of bits of legislation, had all come in when we'd realised that there was unfairness or injustice in some way. So the opportunity came in 2010 to really tidy all of that up, to look differently at kind of what we wanted within the UK, and to think about the impact of what we now call protected characteristics. So I'm not going to sort of spend a lot of time today going into all the different sort of aspects of this. I'm sure some of you are very aware of them. If you want to know more, my kind of recommended place to go is always the ACAS website, acas.org.uk. It's a really kind of good and up-to-date place to go. But it's very much been aware that actually when we dip into each of these protected characteristics, we're aware that there are 9 different areas here covered by the law that we need to be mindful of. And when it comes to prejudice and discrimination, this for me is the kind of the bare minimum, the starting point, the basis to make sure that absolutely we're not discriminating on the basis of any of these protected characteristics. So that's all I'm going to say on those for the moment. What I want to sort of really add into this kind of this whole discussion, I guess, is that if we're really going to move towards conscious inclusion, it's so much more than just making sure that we've covered the protected characteristics, that we're legal. It's really thinking as forward-looking organisations, how much more can we do? What else can we do to support our employees, to provide those services, those support along the way that people need at different stages in their lives, really. Oh, pardon me. And as you can see there, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list. This is just meant to be sort of illustrative of the different things that people might need support on at different stages in their lives and their careers and so on. So people may have caring responsibilities, might need some flexibility, some support from yourselves as organisations on account of the caring responsibilities. We all know that there's a whole challenge around socioeconomic issues at the moment. It's ongoing. People, again, might need additional support on the basis of that. People's employability, their track records, they may have a patchy sort of employment history. Again, support we can provide. Childcare, a number of us have at different stages in our lives. We might be a lone parent. Again, with all of these, flexibility, support, and so on along the way. An area that's getting talked more and more about is menopause and andropause. So I think a lot of us are familiar with the term menopause, maybe not so much andropause. So andropause is the male equivalent to the female menopause. I think the language around this doesn't help necessarily. My understanding is it's kind of taken from sort of Greek stems here in the wording. So andropause is the male equivalent. So I guess what we jokingly in the past perhaps referred to as the sort of male midlife crisis. Actually, no, it's a recognised medical condition and works in sort of similar ways, and it's similar sort of time in life to the female menopause. There could be other things we're going through, so there could be other health treatments and conditions that we're kind of going through that would not be classified as a disability necessarily, but we may need additional support around. And then there could be aspects around our education, our levels, our standards, and so on, that we might sort of want help and support with. So this, as I say, this is not meant to be an exhaustive list, but it's just to give you some ideas that actually there's so much more we can do as organisations to actually help people feel supported as they go through different stages in their lives. So again, things you can think about. Okay, I'm going to move us forward a little bit further. So I mentioned earlier that there's a simple sort of model that sort of starts to help us understand the psychology behind why we find ourselves as human beings having these implicit biases, why we potentially find ourselves developing prejudices that lead to discrimination, worst case lead to bullying and harassment. And there's a way of kind of starting to create that awareness, that pause moment, hopefully, and start to have those conversations. So quite simply called the attitude and behaviour cycle, as you can see. And I'll just sort of talk you through how this works. And again, just encouraging you to reflect as we go through as how this might sort of impact in your sort of particular organisations, perhaps. So it starts out with me at the top there. So all of us kind of go out there with our set of beliefs, values, attitudes, everything that makes us that sort of unique human being. Out we go into the world with all of those different aspects of ourselves. Our behaviour is then influenced and impacted by our attitude. So whenever we meet someone, whenever we have an interaction with somebody, our behaviour is based on our attitude in that sort of particular situation. Most of the time works perfectly well and positively, but sometimes our biases might be negative, might be prejudicial, and that could show in our behaviours. So when we meet up with somebody perhaps who has a different set of attitudes and beliefs to us, a different outlook on the world, a different upbringing, the way our behaviour impacts on their attitude, and then their behaviour could perhaps feel prejudicial, could be discriminatory. And for me, this sort of model really shows that sort of saying we have a behaviour breeds behaviour. So we kind of trigger these different behaviours in each other. And when I was working with Sam and colleagues at sort of Wrekin, an example that I've sort of borrowed from one of our learners in one of the sort of early groups really kind of resonated, and I'll share it with you because I think it really illustrates this model very well, is attitudes to people in social housing. So if my attitude were that people in social housing are all benefit cheats, no good, going to cause trouble, going to kind of create mess and noise or whatever on the area where I live, so I don't want people in social housing living near me, if that were my attitude, then my behaviour, not surprisingly, if I met somebody who said to me, well, I live in social housing, or I live on a house nearby to you that's a part of social housing, my attitude towards them might then be quite rude or quite blamey or quite in your face in some way. And then not unsurprisingly, that individual who perhaps has met people like me with those prejudices before probably comes back and might be quite rude and defensive with me. Lo and behold, if I'm not careful, I take that piece of behaviour as evidence to back up my attitude that actually I was right to think that you lot who live in social housing are all trouble, rude, no good, because look at how you behave towards me. Rather than pausing and thinking, actually, was that on account of my behaviour? Was it my attitude that actually impacted there in that situation in my behaviour? And actually kind of what I put out there was prejudicial, potentially discriminatory, and actually I triggered that kind of impact on the other person's behaviour. So when we start to unpick this model, it's quite complex, and we can sort of start to see how we can kind of create pause moments as to kind of how we behave in certain situations. The questions I like to ask a group around this sort of particular model when we sort of talk more about it in sort of longer sessions really, but really encourage you to think about it today as well, is how might our attitudes and behaviours impact on our work? What can we learn from sort of working around that cycle? What assumptions might we need to challenge? And as a result of that, what can we do to be more inclusive in our own workplaces? So simple model, complex answers potentially, and some really good stuff that we can sort of start to unpick around all of this. So I really encourage you to sort of think through different aspects of this. Other things we can do. So I'm just going to share with you a few sort of practical tips that we can sort of do to move forward with all of this. Because what we don't want to do when we're sort of training on this topic is to think, well, actually, in case I say the wrong thing, I won't say anything. Actually, no, it should be the opposite. How do we, as it says there, promote and encourage awareness? Some really good tricks you can use, some really good tips, some things you can do to reflect upon your biases when you start to engage with this whole topic. And a really good set of questions I find very useful are these three here. Simple, but work really, really well. So ask yourself, is my opinion factually true? So if I'm questioning my bias, is my opinion factually true? Is it always factually true? And then furthermore, what evidence do I have for my opinion? So don't beat yourself up for what you think might be a bias. Actually test it out, check it out, see what might be going on for you. So ask yourself those questions. So that's one thing you can do. Another key area, if you want to embark upon this journey or continue your journey, if you're thinking, actually, I think we're quite good at this, what more can we do? Is really think about that kind of microcosm, I guess, of where people come together, whether it's virtually, hybrid or in room, meetings and discussions. Really think through, well, actually, how do we set our meetings up? Where do we position people? How do we make sure our meetings are inclusive? How do we encourage diversity in our meetings? How do we make sure that people are heard? How are decisions made? Lots of different aspects around this. So one of my real encouragements is, here's a really great starting point. Think about how you manage your meetings. Think about how people get involved, how you facilitate them, how you chair them, all those different aspects around it. It can be as simple as sometimes a perception or a reality that when one person talks, another person seems to always check their phone, or one person gets talked over by another person. How are we managing these different aspects around our meetings? So again, a great starting point to move forward with. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing there and kind of open up the conversation and welcome Sam into the room and kind of start that conversation really, Sam. So we know each other pretty well. More time sort of sat in room together really than we do. Yeah. So I guess maybe start out, Sam, say a little bit about yourself and kind of how you've kind of come to do what you do.
Yeah, sure. So I'm the social value and inclusion, social value and inclusion, quite a long job title for Wrekin Housing Group. I've worked with the organisation for about 5 or 6 years. And Wrekin is based in the Midlands. I'm not sure whether people have heard of the walking around the Wrekin, but we're in the Midlands. We have homes in Telford, in Shropshire and in Staffordshire. We've got over 12,000 homes. We've got over 1,200 staff, so a reasonable sized organisation within the sector. And for the sector, EDI work, our equalities, diversity, inclusion work, really, we really needed to up the pace on following a number of things that have happened in the sector over the past sort of 4, 5, 6 years. Obviously, there was Grenfell, which was an absolute tragedy, and the sector really needed to look at itself very carefully about that. There was the Black Lives Matters movement. There was the obvious inequalities that came on the back of COVID and the pandemic, and more recently, the incident in Rochdale last year where the young boy lost his life due to damp and mold. So the sector really has been looking at itself quite carefully over the last few years. And so here at Wrekin, we recognised that we needed to up our game around EDI. And yeah, so that's, we've been on this journey for a couple of years, and as you say, Claire, approached DSW 12 months ago or so, and we very much wanted to make sure that we, if we were going to roll this out as training in our organisation, very much needed to be relevant to our staff here at Wrekin.
Yeah, so take that a step further then, Sam. So I guess explaining, I know the approach we took, but it'd be really useful just to hear your perspective as to kind of how we developed it and kind of what down that route really.
Yeah, so I'm going to use words like co-create and co-design, because that's actually what we did. We're a big organisation. For us, we've got staff in all sorts of different roles. So we've got frontline staff, we've got trades that go in and out of people's houses, maintenance, we've got a caring part of our organisation, so we've got care staff, we've got catering, we've got professional services, so we've got staff in all sorts of various roles. And what we were really keen to do is not to do perhaps the traditional, I've been around quite a long time, the traditional form of equalities training where you're told all the things you can't do, very much legally based. This is the law, this is what you shouldn't do. And we were very keen not to go down that route. Of course, it's really important for us to understand our legal obligations. But as you've covered off already, I think, Claire, in your presentation this morning, was much more about inclusion, about recognising difference, celebrating diversity, making people feel that they belong. So within the workforce, how well do we know our workforce? How well do we know that people feel included in this business and want to come to Wrekin and bring their whole self to Wrekin? From a customer perspective, do we really understand our customers, the people that live in our homes, the people that we provide care for? We might, going back to you, I equally love the 3 boys slide. If we're offering the same service to everybody, does that mean people can access it in the same way? Well, no, of course not. So do we understand that? So what we were keen to do is make the training really relevant, is what I'm getting around to saying. So we approached you, didn't we, and Indy, and said, look, will you work together with us and on this bespoke training course? And the idea was to put all of our staff through. So this was a big investment for us, big investment in time, in terms of releasing staff to come on this training. So so we worked together, didn't we? And there was lots of online meetings, and we used the expertise of DSW in terms of the information that we needed and the content we needed to bring into the sessions, but very much all the time thinking, how is that relevant to Wrekin? How is that relevant to our staff? How can we make it as interactive and participative as we could, so that actually when people had finished the session, it was relevant to them, or they could see relevance, and not talked at, as I say, much more about discussion. So we spent quite a lot of time doing it, didn't we? We were really adamant that we were going to get this right. We did a pilot we have a group of staff called the Wrekin Allies. So 40 or 50 staff are signed up as Wrekin Allies across the business, and we used them as our guinea pigs to run the pilot session about this time last year, I believe. And then we went away and tweaked it based on feedback from them. It was a half-day session in the end, wasn't it? All face-to-face as well. We went down the face-to-face route. We felt that was very important. And then we had a dress rehearsal, and then we started rolling out, and all the way through we tweaked, didn't we? All the way through, we were in regular contact. We used a lot of case studies, and that's the way we went about it.
And I think I think it was the bespoking for me that made the big difference, You know, as we piloted and tweaked and rolled and our dress rehearsal, didn't we? We kind of did a launch around. It's always been aware that although we wanted consistency, we also wanted to keep adapting and learning.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, you know, again, thinking back to the early days, we always made sure that there was a member of staff in the sessions with you in those first few sessions, again, so we could recognize it, because you coming in as an external trainer clearly didn't know our business the way we know our business, and we wanted to be able to field some of those early questions, didn't we, and back up and support you to better understand how Wrekin ticks. And then, you know, I mean, within about 4 or 5 sessions, we stepped away and just left you to it. Always at the end of a, you know, a phone or an email or in the building, but we left you to it. But I think, again, that making those first staff that went through the process realize how important it was to us as a business, and how seriously we were taking it, I think helped. And then you know, as staff were coming through, then they were talking to their colleagues, and, you know, there ended up being quite a lot of anticipation and eagerness to go on EDI training, which, you know, again, over the years, that hasn't always been the case.
Absolutely. And I guess the other bit we haven't mentioned really was the Wrekin video that you made as well. So that was kind of part of that early rollout, wasn't it?
Well, you did. I was thinking, actually, just when you were, again, when you were reflecting on some of the other things, that everybody is different, and so we'd seen there are a number of videos out there, aren't there? Often they're Americanized. You know, there are a number of things, and they all get across great diversity and inclusion messages, but we really wanted to bring it to life at Wrekin. So yeah, again, we reached out to, I think, 20 or 30 staff. We scripted a little film where each member of staff held up a board with their thoughts or their feelings, and how they may or may not feel included in the organisation. And when we did that specifically for the training, we kept it under wraps. We only released it at each training session, so it was new to everybody that attended that particular session. And again, I think that made it real, because people could see their colleagues and think, oh crikey, didn't know that about them, or wow, do they really feel like that? And it didn't necessarily mean you did feel like that, but you were, you know, you were sharing something that somebody else might feel or could be applicable to you. So yeah, we had a great time.
Always looked fun. Yeah, it was nice to sort of really personalize that, I think, make it feel like you felt as an organization. I think that did make a big difference to people.
Yeah.
So I guess, you know, we kind of rolled out, we sort of finished rollout, and I did an official handover to your training team a couple of weeks ago. So it's kind of now business as usual. It's your program to pick up when staff join and kind of keep going with, really. So how have you seen the benefits so far?
Yeah, so well over 1,000 people, as you say, have been through the training over a 6-month period. And now our own trainers will pick that up as you say, business as usual. As new starters come in, or if anybody had been on sick or whatever, then they will be picked up. So we will always pick up all staff with this particular training. But and in terms of what differences it made, I do genuinely think people feel more confident about being able to talk about things. If they still aren't sure whether they can or can't talk about things, we've got quite a lot of staff networks around. You know, we've got the Wrekin Allies, we've got a Proud to Be Me group, we've got a Disability Positive group, we've got a Heritage and Culture group. So again, we were able to signpost and encourage people to staff to talk about things. I think it's given staff more confidence if they see anything out as part of their work. It links very closely to our safeguarding work, our see something, say something if there's any concerns. But also, again, just about being more tolerant, treating people with fairness and respect, making us feel that, you know, we are an organisation where people want to belong, and if they don't feel they do, then they can speak out. In terms of the what next, so that I would say it was quite an entry level training, which again we purposefully did, so everybody felt that it was relevant and useful to them. So what we are now looking at as an organisation is very much what sits on top of that or alongside that. You know, what do we need to do more around management training? What do we need to do about things like unconscious bias and you know, all of those? We're looking at various more specific courses around things like neurodiversity, and a deeper dive into some of the things that relate to EDI. So it was a really good springboard. I do genuinely believe it has made a difference. The feedback that we got was overwhelmingly positive from staff. We had staff commenting that they had no idea they would enjoy it. They weren't looking forward to it, and it was the best training ever, and things like that. And from parts of the organisation which traditionally are difficult to engage. So yeah, it's been really successful, but I think it is because we co-designed it. It is because we made it specific to us, or relevant to us, I should say, and that's where we've managed to pull it off.
And I think that's for me when this really works. Coming in and just doing something to people is not a good way of managing this whole area, is it? But working it together, so it definitely felt like yours.
Yeah, and actually it wasn't just, that's made me think as well. I think it's important to come across this morning in this session that we got people moving quite a lot, didn't we? It wasn't sitting, listening,
it certainly
and looking.
Was,
people were there was all sorts of practical. And that was what you brought to the table. We wouldn't have thought about doing that. So that partnership with DSW was really effective.
And that's one of my kind of basic kind of ways of working, really. Is I'm a great believer, as we found out together, really, that it's got to be practical, it's got to work. I'm very experiential in how I work, and that does mean bit of blood flow to the legs, let's move around, let's stand about, let's talk to each other. And I think kind of that mix of a bit of theory with a lot of practice and discussion does make a big difference, doesn't it?
It does.
Absolutely. So what next, Sam? I suppose really kind of not just the training, but kind of where's Wrekin heading? Because I know you do lots of different things around this whole area of diversity.
It's a key priority for us. Hopefully you can see behind me our vision is to make a difference to people's lives. We've got a number of values. It's a really big push around everybody matters, that and positive change. We're all on a journey, aren't we? It's an overused phrase, but we are. We don't feel that our work is done, probably will never be done. But we're a part of an organisation, a sector organisation called the Housing Diversity Network. We're currently being supported by them to do an accreditation around our EDI. We earlier this year we got to achieve bronze in our Stonewall accreditation. So there's all sorts of things that we are doing. Our push at the moment, I feel, again, I don't want to say we've done staff, but I feel we've done a lot around our workforce. And our push now is, what do we know about our customers? What more should we know about our customers? And how can we make sure that we are adapting our services as necessary? How accessible are we? And all of those sorts of retrospective deep dives, looking at the different parts of the business to make sure we aren't disadvantaged, inadvertently disadvantaging or discriminating against anyone. So
Thank you. I think that's just really important. I wanted to sort of end with that, because it's, the training's important, but it's everything else that really makes a difference, isn't it? And kind of linking back to where we started the session today, is that's all part of that journey, isn't it? Everything's got to fit. Exactly as you say, if you miss a bit, if customers don't feel valued or included or all of those other bits, then it just doesn't work, does it? It all needs to come together.
That's right. And it's never, as I say, it doesn't end. If you're taking this seriously, it needs to be embedded in everything we do.
Absolutely. Fantastic. Thank you so much, Sam. I'm going to bring us to a close there. I really appreciate that. So thanks so much for sharing and joining today. I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I'm just going to finish up with a couple of final thoughts, and then invite any questions that you might have from anybody. So my final kind of couple of slides just to leave you with really are kind of really where to go next on this journey. So hopefully we've, if you needed convincing, I'm sure you didn't, but we've illustrated kind of why this matters and why it is that journey as Sam described. So going from, as it says there, unconscious bias to conscious inclusion, what sort of things can we do? I'm a big believer in start with yourselves. So thinking about you, some good questions for you to think about here. How do you think you handle difference? Ultimately, that's what this is all about. Are you comfortable with anything that sits outside your version of your normal comfort zone, whatever that might be for you? What will you try to do differently to help you see a new perspective? So thinking about yourselves and that starting point. And one thing, so thinking of one thing that you'd like to try and do differently at your place of work to create an inclusive environment. And I always think that whenever I run any of these sorts of sessions, if we all took one thing and did it, what a massive difference that would make. So on that note, it lets me going to leave you with my final call to action before we open to Q&A. And my request always around this training is, what is your one thing? So take one action away, one thing, big or small, that you can do. And if we all do that, you know, that multiplies out and becomes a big movement of everybody doing something towards conscious inclusion. So that's a thought I'd like to leave you with, everybody. So thank you very much. Thank you to Sam. And I'm going to sort of open up in a moment to anything, Indy, that might have sort of come through in the chat, anything that you think might be good for us to pick up.
Okay, so I think we have one question. Okay, I think someone raised the hand but lowered it, so let me just check. Okay, can you see the questions?
Yeah, I can.
Yeah,
There we go.
S. Morris.
Thank you. Yes. Yeah, so any tips to deal with people that are hesitant to go outside of their comfort zone and listen to and incorporate EDI into their practice? Yeah, that's a big question packed into a few lines, isn't it, that one? I guess my sort of starting point would be sort of, I guess what Sam sort of alluded to really when we were talking earlier, is when we're doing this sort of having sort of training sessions, it's really trying to find ways to make people feel as comfortable as they can, but kind of willing to be open to talk about things. So kind of building discussion into sort of awareness and training sessions, really, to get them in the safety of the training room, in that sort of psychological safe kind of place, actually having conversations, sort of talking about things and so on, and sort of finding ways through that. So my kind of encouragement, I guess, is to start small, start within the sort of the safety of that training room environment, and then sort of gradually kind of find a way to sort of talk their way through that, really. So start there, seems to work. And I guess not push or force people, you know, let people kind of, where at all possible, kind of find their own way with it. Because I feel if we push, it doesn't tend to happen. So, oh, Sam, did you want to come in and answer this next question? Or is that me? It says, for some reason it says,
no, sorry, I
sorry.
have chipped in on the first question.
Okay, that's why it came up.
Yeah, I was just saying really about
Sorry.
making things as real as possible. That's we were quite concerned about I think the things that S. Morris is alluding to.
Yes.
And we worked hard to make things as real as possible about real people, real life stories.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden we were able to see that the penny dropped, that actually people, it wasn't then about them over there, or they're nothing to do with us type thing. You know, it could well be there somebody in their family or their neighbor or their, you know, colleague, and pushed about the inclusion and the difference, and acknowledging and celebrating difference, or just being aware of difference, and be honest that, you know, you don't have to like everybody, do you? There are reasons why we might not like everybody or somebody.
Absolutely.
So that's real life. But but not taking it beyond, you know, understanding that everybody's in a different place. What is it? We might be in the same storm, but we're not in the same boat, or I can't remember what the phrase is.
I know what you mean.
Yeah, but make it real. That's all I was chipping in, really.
That's okay. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Appreciate that. Okay, so next question. Thank you, S. Morris. We seem to have answered your question in a number of ways. So Judith, you've put up there thoughts on pronouns. Yeah, causes concerns. It's a tricky one. I often have that kind of internal as well as kind of conversation with clients around this one. I think it's just it's a part of our language. Our language is forever changing. I'm a linguist by trade. My first degree was in linguistics. So I kind of come at this with that sort of knowledge around language, really. And our language is constantly changing. So I think really just, I guess, encouraging people. Some of the case studies we used with Wrekin, we deliberately sort of had people whose pronouns were they or them, and encouraging, when people were looking at those case studies, to get more used to using different pronouns, and really just, I guess, raise when it came up as a question or a concern, having the conversation, but not making a big thing of it, just kind of explaining why it matters, and then letting people again kind of find a comfortable way with it, really. So that's kind of my thought on that one. I think I saw a comment come up there, but it seems to have, oh, there we go. Okay, that's a nice one. So thank you to S. Morris. So that's a good comment. Thank you. Yeah, so you've incorporated pronoun badges into college for staff and students to wear. So I think that's really helpful. I think generally the thought around this one is just make it as normal as possible, so that everybody just puts their pronouns out there, and then you don't have to ask. It's just for all of us. No one's been made to feel different or excluded in any way, really. So anything more we can do to just make that feel just like our everyday, I guess, is the way to go with it, really. Thank you. Anything else anybody wants to comment or add in at this stage? Some really good questions there. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for the questions, and thank you for your input, Sam, and answering those questions, Claire. So thank you, Claire, for delivering a great and valuable session today, and thank you to Sam for joining us. Very much appreciate it. We hope you, the attendees, have enjoyed today's webinar, found it insightful and able to take away some useful information. Claire, if you can just pop onto the next slide.
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
Fantastic. So my contact details are displayed on the screen. So should you have any further questions or require any further support, please do not hesitate to get in touch. As always, we welcome any feedback on today's session. Please do follow us on our socials for more news and updates for upcoming webinars. We are planning to do some more towards the end of the year. So if there's any sort of topics, anything that you might want to gain a bit more further insight into, we'll also welcome any sort of suggestions. So if that's all for today, then we'll wrap up, and thank you all for attending. And again, thank you, Claire and Sam.
Thanks. Thank you, everybody. Bye.